Life in Lakewood had always been a mix of serene mornings and bustling evenings. The small town, nestled by a shimmering lake and surrounded by dense woods, was a picturesque place that felt like a living postcard. The quaint streets were lined with cozy houses, each with its own story. For me, Jake Thompson, Lakewood was home for nearly 15 years. I shared my life here with my wife Emily, in a house that seemed to hold our laughter and dreams within its walls. Our house was a charming two-story with a white picket fence and a garden that Emily took immense pride in. Roses bloomed in the summer, and the yard was always well kept. Inside, the rooms were filled with photographs capturing our shared moments, vacations, anniversaries, simple dinners that turned into joyous events. The kitchen, with its rustic charm and the aroma of Emily's cooking, was the heart of our home. It was in that kitchen where we'd have our morning coffees, discussing plans for the day ahead. Emily was a beautiful woman with an infectious smile and a laugh that could light up a room. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, a job she was passionate about. Her dedication to her work was something I admired deeply. Our life together was simple, yet fulfilling. We didn't have children, but we often talked about the future, imagining a family to complete our picture-perfect life. I worked in logistics, a steady job that kept us comfortable. My hours were long, but I took pride in providing for us. Our routines were well established. Mornings started with coffee together. Evenings often ended with a movie or a walk by the lake. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but the foundation of our relationship was built on love and trust, or so I thought. The town itself was tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone else, and secrets were hard to keep. Lakewood had a way of weaving its residents into a close community, where news traveled fast, and neighbors were always ready to lend a helping hand. It was this very nature of the town that made what happened next even more shocking. Little did I know, behind the facade of our perfect life, a storm was brewing. One that would shatter the very core of our marriage and leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about Emily and our life together. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Emily's behavior started to change in ways that I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, it was small things. Her late nights at the hospital became more frequent, her phone was always glued to her hand, and she was more secretive about her messages. I brushed it off, attributing it to the pressures of her job and the exhaustion that came with it. After all, being a nurse was demanding, and she often came home looking worn out. But then there were other signs that were harder to ignore. Emily began to dress differently. She started wearing more makeup and putting more effort into her appearance, even on days she wasn't working. She'd leave the house dressed up, saying she was going out with friends or running errands. Her perfume, which she rarely used before, now lingered in the air long after she'd left. It felt like she was preparing for someone other than me. Her demeanor towards me also shifted. She became more distant, her once warm and loving nature turning cold and indifferent. Our conversations, which used to flow effortlessly, were now filled with awkward silences. She seemed distracted, her mind always elsewhere. When I tried to talk to her about it, she brushed me off with curt replies, telling me I was overthinking things and that everything was fine. I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me otherwise. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share with me. It gnawed at me, the secrecy and the growing distance between us. I tried to dismiss my suspicions, telling myself that I was being paranoid. Yet the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One night, I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower. My hands trembled as I picked it up, feeling guilty for invading her privacy. But I needed to know what was going on. To my frustration, the phone was locked, and I didn't know the password. It was another change that added to my growing unease. Emily had never felt the need to lock her phone before. Then, there were the phone calls she'd taken in another room, speaking in hushed tones, her voice barely audible. Whenever I walked in, she'd quickly hang up, claiming it was just work-related, but it didn't feel right. There was an intimacy in those calls that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the frequency of the calls, but the way she reacted to them. The way she'd light up when the phone rang, only to shut down completely once the call ended. The tipping point came one weekend when she said she was going on a girls' trip with some friends. She packed a small suitcase, dressed to the nines, and left without giving me a clear idea of where she was going or with whom. I spent that weekend in a haze of anxiety and suspicion, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When she returned, She was evasive about the details, and I could sense a change in her, a distance that felt almost tangible. Desperate for answers, I began to pay closer attention to her behavior. I noticed how she'd spend hours on her laptop, quickly closing it whenever I walked into the room. Her browsing history was always cleared, another sign that she was hiding something. The final straw was when I found a hotel receipt in her purse for a weekend she had supposedly spent with her friends. The room was booked for 2. It was then that I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The woman I loved was slipping away from me, caught up in something that was driving a wedge between us. My suspicions were no longer just paranoid thoughts. They were becoming an undeniable reality. I needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And so, I decided to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets that Emily was keeping from me, even if it meant shattering the illusion of our perfect life. The night that changed everything started out like any other. Emily had left for another girls' night out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and suspicions. Unable to sit still, I found myself pacing around the house, the silence only amplifying my anxiety. I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Emily wouldn't give me the truth, I would have to find it myself. I started with her laptop, hoping she had slipped up and left something behind. As expected, her browsing history was cleared, but I knew there had to be something she missed. I searched through her files and found a folder hidden within another folder, labeled innocuously as Work Documents. My heart raced as I opened it, hoping and dreading what I might find. The contents confirmed my worst fears. There were messages, emails, and photos exchanged between Emily and a man named Chris. He wasn't just an old friend from high school, as she had claimed. The messages were explicit, filled with emotions and desires that should have been reserved for our marriage. They talked about secret meetings, passionate encounters, and future plans. Plans that didn't include me. One message in particular stood out. It was from just a few days ago. I can't wait to see you this weekend. Every moment with you is like a dream. My hands shook as I read it, the words blurring through my tears of rage and heartbreak. I took screenshots of everything, emailing them to myself as evidence. I couldn't confront her without proof, and I wanted to be prepared for whatever might come next. Once I had secured the evidence, I returned her laptop to its original state, ensuring she wouldn't suspect anything. Hours later, Emily returned home. She was unusually cheerful, her face glowing with an excitement that hadn't been there for months. The sight of her filled me with a mix of anger and sorrow. How could she act so normal, so happy, while betraying me so deeply? I waited until she had settled in, then decided it was time. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up, her smile faltering. "About what?" "About this," I said, holding up my phone with the messages and photos displayed. Her face went pale, and she took a step back, her eyes widening in shock. "Where did you get those?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "It doesn't matter where I got them. What matters is that I know. I know about Chris, about the affair, about all the lies." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen and unable to move. I pressed on, my anger giving me strength. "How long, Emily? How long have you been lying to me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally found her voice. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Never meant for this to happen," I repeated, incredulous. "You've been sneaking around, lying to my face, and you never meant for this to happen?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "It started about a year ago. We reconnected on Facebook, and it just happened. I was lonely, Jake. You were always working, always busy. I felt like I didn't matter anymore." Her words cut deep, but they didn't excuse what she had done. "So, you decided to cheat? To throw away 15 years of marriage because you felt lonely?" "I know it was wrong," she cried, "but I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, you did," I said coldly. "You hurt me more than you could ever imagine." The room fell silent, her sobs the only sound breaking the heavy stillness. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and a profound sense of betrayal. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, had shattered my trust in the most devastating way possible. "I can't do this anymore, Emily." I said finally. I can't live with someone who would betray me like this. What are you saying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying I want a divorce, I replied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. This marriage is over. Her reaction was immediate. She fell to her knees, pleading and begging for forgiveness. But I had made up my mind. I walked away, leaving her on the floor, and headed to the guest room. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no going back. My life would never be the same, but at least now I knew the reality of the woman I had married. The next morning dawned with a heaviness that was almost tangible. Emily was still in the bedroom, likely reeling from the confrontation the night before. I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions. I knew I had to confront her again, to make it clear that there was no coming back from this. Emily finally emerged, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at me with a mix of fear and hope, as if clinging to the possibility that I might change my mind. But my resolve was firm. Jake, please, we need to talk, she said, her voice shaky. We've already talked, I replied coldly. But if you have something to say, I'm listening. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Jake, I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I love you. I love you more than anything, and I want to make this right. I want to fix our marriage. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You want to fix our marriage? You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Chris. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I was stupid and I let my loneliness get the better of me. But Jake, please, give me a chance to make things right. Her words were like knives, cutting into the raw wound of my heart. How do you expect me to do that, Emily? How do you expect me to ever trust you again? She stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. Jake, please. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I promise I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling? I scoffed. You think talking to a therapist is going to erase what you've done? You betrayed me, Emily. You betrayed our marriage. How can I ever believe anything you say again? Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for her. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the lies. The pity quickly turned back into anger. Sorry isn't enough, Emily. You broke us, and now we have to deal with the consequences. She looked up, her eyes desperate. Jake, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we had. I love you. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat, I said, my voice ice cold. I'm filing for divorce, and I want you to move out. Her face went pale, and she shook her head violently. No, Jake, please. This is our home. Where will I go? That's not my problem, I replied. You should have considered the consequences of your actions. I'll give you some time to find a place, but you need to start packing. The reality of my words seemed to hit her all at once, and she broke down completely. Jake, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. But I had made up my mind. There was no turning back. I stood up, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table, and walked out of the house. I needed air, space, and time to think. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head. I ended up at a park we used to visit often. Sitting on a bench overlooking the lake, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, sadness, betrayal. The memories of happier times only intensified the pain of the present. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved become someone I couldn't even recognize? When I returned home, Emily was still at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. Jake, please. Let's talk. I shook my head. There's nothing left to talk about, Emily. I want you to pack your things and leave. I can't do this anymore. Her face hardened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes. Fine, Jake. If that's what you want, I'll go. But don't think for a second that this is all my fault. You were never here. You were always too busy with work to notice me, to care about what I needed. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. You're actually trying to blame me for your affair? Unbelievable. I'm not saying what I did was right, she snapped. But you were never there for me, Jake. You made me feel invisible. That doesn't justify what you did, I shot back. You had a choice, Emily. You could have talked to me, but instead you chose to cheat. She stood up, her hands trembling. You know what, Jake? Maybe you're right. Maybe this is for the best. Maybe we were never meant to be. Maybe, I said quietly. But we'll never know now, will we? She looked at me one last time, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. This was the end of our marriage, the end of everything we had built together. But it was also a chance for a new beginning, a chance to rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. As Emily packed her things and left the house, I felt a strange sense of finality. This chapter of my life was over, and it was time to move on. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had to take the first step. I had to reclaim my life and find a way to heal from the wounds of her betrayal. In the days following Emily's departure, the house felt empty and lifeless. The silence was almost oppressive, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had torn my life apart. I went through the motions of daily life, but there was a rage simmering beneath the surface, a desire for justice that I couldn't ignore. Emily had destroyed our marriage, and I needed to find a way to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. I spent hours thinking about how to exact my revenge. It wasn't enough to just move on. I needed her to understand the gravity of her actions. I wanted to hit her where it hurt the most, to make her regret ever betraying me. After much contemplation, I devised a plan that would expose her deceit to everyone she cared about. First, I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the messages, the photos, the hotel receipts. I compiled them into a detailed dossier, documenting every instance of her infidelity. It was a painstaking process, but each piece of evidence fueled my resolve. I knew that the more thorough I was, the more impactful my revenge would be. Next, I turned to social media. Emily had always been active on Facebook, sharing glimpses of our seemingly perfect life. I decided to use this platform to reveal the truth. I created a private group, inviting all of our close friends and family. The group's title was simple and direct: The Truth About Emily. On the day of the reveal, I posted the entire dossier to the group, along with a message explaining what had happened. I detailed how Emily had betrayed me, how she had carried on an affair behind my back, and how her actions had shattered our marriage. I made sure to include every incriminating detail, sparing nothing. As expected, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Friends and family flooded the group with messages of shock, disbelief, and outrage. Many of them reached out to me personally, expressing their support and condemning Emily's actions. It was a small comfort to know that people believed me, that they saw the truth of what she had done. Emily's response was swift and furious. She called me, screaming and crying, demanding that I take down the post. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, of turning everyone against her. But I remained calm, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. You did this to yourself, Emily, I said coldly. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. She continued to rant and rave, but I ended the call, refusing to engage any further. I had said what needed to be said, and now it was time for her to face the fallout. The satisfaction I felt was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me going. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more person who needed to know the truth: Chris, the man she had betrayed me with. I tracked down his contact information and sent him a copy of the dossier, along with a message. This is what your actions have led to. I hope you're happy. A few days later, I received a response from Chris. His message was brief, but filled with regret. He apologized for his part in the affair, claiming that he hadn't realized the full extent of the damage it would cause. He promised to stay away from Emily and to never contact her again. It was a hollow gesture, but it brought a small measure of closure. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life began to unravel. She lost friends, who now saw her for what she truly was. Even some of her colleagues at the hospital turned their backs on her. She moved out of Lakewood, unable to face the constant reminders of her betrayal and the damage it had caused. As for me, the sense of justice I had sought gradually turned to a more profound sense of healing. My anger slowly dissipated, replaced by a determination to rebuild my life. The path to recovery was long and fraught with challenges, but each step forward was a step away from the pain and towards a brighter future. The revenge had been cathartic, but it was also a stark reminder of the need to move on. I realized that holding on to anger would only keep me trapped in the past. I needed to focus on myself, to find happiness and fulfillment beyond the shadow of Emily's betrayal. And so, I began the arduous process of reclaiming my life. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and poured myself into my work. I even started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me navigate the complex emotions that still lingered. Through it all, I learned that revenge, while satisfying in the short term, wasn't the key to true healing. It was the decision to let go, to embrace the future with hope and determination, that ultimately set me free. Months passed, and I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. The house felt less empty, the silence less oppressive. I found solace in new routines, the support of friends, and the clarity that came from therapy. But despite all the progress, there was one final conversation I knew I had to have with Emily to truly close this chapter of my life. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received a call from her. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile. "Jake, can we talk? Please, I just need to see you one last time." I agreed, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. We decided to meet at a small cafe by the lake, a place where we had shared many happy moments in the past. As I drove there, memories of our life together flooded my mind, each one tinged with the pain of betrayal. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked different, tired, worn down, and with a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As I sat down, she looked up, her expression a mixture of regret and longing. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling, "thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to see you." I nodded, staying silent. I wanted to hear what she had to say, to understand her perspective, even if it didn't change anything. She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the affair, for lying to you, for all the pain I caused. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize now how much I've lost, how much I threw away." Her words, though sincere, felt like echoes of apologies I had heard before. "Why, Emily, why did you do it?" She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "I was lonely, Jake. You were always working, always busy. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. Chris made me feel seen, appreciated. But it was all a lie. I know that now. I was working to provide for us, to give us a good life," I said, my voice filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. "I never imagined that you felt that way, and you never told me." "I know," she whispered. "I should have talked to you, but I was scared. I didn't want to admit that I was unhappy, that I needed more. I thought I could find it somewhere else without destroying what we had." I sighed, the weight of her words settling over me. "You destroyed everything, Emily. Our marriage, our trust, our life together. You can't just undo that with an apology." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry. I've lost everything because of my mistakes, and I have to live with that." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe and the distant laughter of children playing by the lake filling the air. It was a stark contrast to the heaviness between us, a reminder of the normalcy that once was. "I'm moving away," Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need a fresh start. Somewhere far from here. I can't stay in Lakewood. There are too many memories, too much pain." I nodded, understanding her need to leave. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily. I really do." She reached out, her hand hovering over mine before pulling back. "I hope you find happiness too, Jake. You deserve it. More than anyone, you deserve it." With that, she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She gave me one last, lingering look before turning and walking away. I watched her leave, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. This was the end of our story, the final closure I needed. As I sat there, finishing my coffee, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger and betrayal that had consumed me for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward. Emily was a chapter in my life that had come to a painful end, but it was not the end of my story. I left the cafe and walked by the lake, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I was ready to let go of the past and embrace whatever came next. The divorce proceedings began in earnest a few weeks after my final conversation with Emily. It was a cold, rainy morning when I walked into the courthouse, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. The courtroom was stark and imposing, the kind of place that seemed to magnify every emotion, every tension. My lawyer, Sarah, was a fierce and competent woman who had been with me every step of the way. She had helped me gather all the evidence, prepare my statements, and steel myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As we sat at our table, waiting for the judge to arrive, she leaned over and whispered, "Remember, Jake, stay calm and stick to the facts. We have a strong case." I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Across the room, Emily sat with her lawyer, looking fragile and worn. She avoided eye contact, her focus seemingly on the table in front of her. It was hard to reconcile the woman who had once been my loving wife with the stranger sitting there now. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. As the proceedings began, Sarah presented our case with clarity and precision. She detailed the evidence of Emily's infidelity, the lies, and the betrayal. Each piece of evidence was laid out meticulously, painting a vivid picture of the pain and deception that had led us to this point. Emily's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that the marriage had been troubled for years and that Emily's actions were a result of feeling neglected and unloved. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge seemed unimpressed by their attempts to deflect blame. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaky, "I take full responsibility for my actions. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain I've caused Jake. But I want to be clear that I never intended for things to end up like this. I ask for your understanding and leniency." Her words, though remorseful, couldn't erase the reality of what she had done. The judge listened, his expression stern and thoughtful. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Miss Thompson, while I appreciate your acknowledgement of wrongdoing, the facts of this case are clear. Your actions have caused significant harm to Mr. Thompson and have irreparably damaged this marriage. I find in favor of Mr. Thompson." With those words, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The judge awarded me the house and a fair division of assets, recognizing the betrayal and the impact it had on my life. Emily was granted a modest settlement and ordered to vacate the property within a month. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The legal battle was over, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Sarah patted my back reassuringly. "You did well, Jake. This is a big step towards moving on." I nodded, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you." Back at home, the house felt different, emptier, yet somehow lighter. Emily began packing her things, and the process was mercifully quiet. We barely spoke, the silence between us filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had transpired. One evening, as she was finishing up, she approached me. "Jake, I just wanted to say goodbye, and I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Emily, but I do wish you the best. I hope you find what you're looking for." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Goodbye, Jake. Goodbye, Emily." And with that, she left. The door closed behind her, and I was alone in the house that had once been filled with so many memories, both good and bad. It was a strange feeling, an ending, but also a beginning. The following days were a blur of rearranging furniture, cleaning, and trying to reclaim the space as my own. Friends and family came over to help, their presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't truly alone. Each change I made to the house felt like a step forward, a way to distance myself from the pain and start anew. I also reconnected with activities I had long neglected. I joined a local gym, started running in the mornings, and even took up painting, a hobby I had enjoyed in my youth but had abandoned over the years. These pursuits gave me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my energy and emotions into something positive. Therapy sessions continued, providing a safe space to explore my feelings and work through the lingering hurt. Dr. Ellis, my therapist, was patient and understanding, guiding me through the complex process of healing. "Forgiveness is not about absolving someone of their actions, Jake," he said during one session. "It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It's a process, and it's okay to take your time." His words resonated deeply. I realized that forgiving Emily wasn't about forgetting what she had done or excusing her behavior. It was about letting go of the hold her betrayal had on my heart, allowing myself to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The pain of the betrayal still lingered, but it was no longer the defining feature of my life. I was reclaiming my identity, finding joy in the little things, and looking forward to the future with cautious optimism. Emily and I had no further contact. She moved to another town, starting a new life away from the memories of Lakewood. I heard from mutual friends that she was doing okay, trying to rebuild in her own way. I wished her well from a distance, hoping that she too could find a path to healing. Life in Lakewood continued, the seasons changing as they always did. And with each passing day, I felt stronger, more resilient. The trial had been a necessary step, a formal end to a chapter that had been filled with so much pain. But it was also a new beginning, a chance to redefine myself and my future. As I stood by the lake one evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of colors, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support of friends and family, for the strength to move forward, and for the promise of new beginnings. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of hope. The year following the divorce was a journey of transformation. The pain of betrayal had begun to heal, and in its place grew a sense of newfound strength and clarity. The house, once a reminder of loss, had become a sanctuary of peace and self-discovery. I had taken the time to redecorate, filling the rooms with colors and items that reflected my tastes and aspirations. Each change symbolized a step forward, a way of reclaiming my space and identity. I continued my morning runs by the lake, the fresh air and solitude providing a therapeutic escape. Running had become a ritual, a way to clear my mind and embrace the day with renewed vigor. On weekends, I ventured further, exploring trails and discovering the natural beauty that Lakewood had to offer. Nature had a way of healing, and each run felt like a conversation with the world, reminding me that life, despite its challenges, continued to be beautiful. At the gym, I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. The camaraderie and support from fellow gym-goers provided a sense of community that I had missed. We shared stories, laughed together, and motivated each other to push beyond our limits. The physical exertion was a release, a way to channel the remaining anger and frustration into something positive. My paintings, once hidden away, began to fill my home. I set up a small studio in one of the spare rooms, allowing myself the freedom to create without judgment. Each stroke of the brush was a step towards healing, a way to express emotions that words couldn't capture. Friends and family were supportive, often visiting to admire my work and encouraging me to showcase it more widely. One evening, as I was setting up for an art exhibit at a local gallery, I met someone who would change my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her name was Megan, a fellow artist who had recently moved to Lakewood. She was vibrant and full of life, her passion for art matching my own. We struck up a conversation, sharing stories about our work, our inspirations, and our lives. Megan was different from Emily in so many ways. She was open, honest, and incredibly supportive. Our connection was immediate, and over the next few months, we spent a lot of time together, exploring our shared interests and discovering new ones. She introduced me to new techniques in painting, while I showed her my favorite running trails and nature spots around Lakewood. Our relationship blossomed naturally, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Megan understood the pain of my past, but never let it define our present. She was a constant source of encouragement, pushing me to embrace life fully and to let go of the lingering shadows of my former marriage. We spent countless evenings painting together, our conversations flowing as freely as the colors on our canvases. Megan had a way of seeing the world that was both refreshing and inspiring. She taught me to appreciate the beauty in the smallest details, to find joy in the simple moments of life. With her by my side, I began to see the future in a different light. The fear and uncertainty that had once clouded my vision were replaced with a sense of excitement and possibility. We talked about our dreams, our goals, and the adventures we wanted to embark on together. Megan and I decided to combine our talents and opened a small art studio in Lakewood. The studio quickly became a community hub, a place where artists and art lovers could gather to create, learn, and share their passion. We held workshops, exhibitions, and community events, fostering a sense of connection and creativity that enriched our lives and the lives of others. As the studio flourished, so did our relationship. We moved in together, filling our home with laughter, love, and an ever-growing collection of art. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, had transformed into a haven of happiness and creativity. Through it all, I never forgot the lessons I had learned. The betrayal I had experienced had shaped me, but it did not define me. It had taught me about the importance of communication, trust, and forgiveness. It had shown me the strength I possessed and the resilience to rebuild my life. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how far I had come. From the depths of heartbreak, I had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and ready to embrace the future with open arms. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I had hit it out of the park. Megan and I often talked about the importance of living authentically, of being true to ourselves and each other. Our relationship was a testament to the power of love and the possibility of new beginnings. We supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's successes, and stood by each other through the challenges. On a beautiful spring morning, as we stood by the lake watching the sunrise, Megan turned to me with a smile. "Jake, I want to spend the rest of my life with you," she said, her eyes filled with love and sincerity. "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy filled my eyes as I nodded, my heart overflowing with happiness. "Yes, Megan, I want that too." Our wedding was a celebration of love, resilience, and new beginnings. Friends and family gathered to witness our union, their faces filled with joy and support. It was a day of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt vows, a day that marked the start of a beautiful new chapter in our lives. As I stood there, holding Megan's hand and looking out at the faces of those who had been with me through thick and thin, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had tested me, but it had also rewarded me with more than I could have ever imagined. I had found love again, not just in Megan, but in myself. I had discovered the strength to move forward, to forgive, and to embrace the beauty of life. And as we walked into the future together, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them with love, resilience, and an unbreakable bond. The journey from betrayal to healing had been long and difficult, but it had led me to a place of profound happiness and fulfillment. And for that, I was eternally grateful.